Good morning, Facebook. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ryan, and I'm posting this video on Facebook today because I am taking the 52-week challenge that my good friend Will Dickerson has invited all of us into. For those of you who don't know, a few weeks ago, Will's mom, when she was heading into work that morning, when she opened up her office door at Regis University in Colorado, she found on the floor of her office a piece of paper with the words "White Lives Matter" above a swastika on the floor in her office. And Will's mother is a black woman. And the same piece of paper was delivered to two other women on campus that day. And out of this incident and the lukewarm response that Regis had, as well as the community around her, Will has invited people to do something a little more active in combating racism and bias incidents and hate crimes and all these types of things. In what he's calling this 52-week challenge or hashtag 52 undo. He knows he can't do it alone, so he's inviting anybody and everybody into it. So last week's challenge was for any institution or group that you are part of, create a what he calls a compassionate response team. And this is in case somebody encounters what his mother encountered, so they don't have to sit there alone. Because she was by herself for a while, she just closed and locked the door, and stayed in her office by herself. And instead of have somebody in our community experience something like that and feel like utterly alone, they know who to call and they know who's going to come and to be with them and accompany them throughout the process of figuring out what to do next. So I'm part of Brockton Covenant Church here in Brockton, Massachusetts, and we created that compassionate response team last week. I also work for Brockton Interfaith Community, and we created a compassionate response team as well within our organization, in case one of our members or our leaders experiences something like that in the city. But anybody, we want to put that out there so that people know you can call us if you need somebody to be with you. This week's challenge is a little more personal. This one is for anybody to post a 3 to 5 minute video talking about when they first realized they were in the skin that they were in. So for me, when I first realized that I was white, it didn't happen until I was maybe 21 or 22. I think I was 21. When I graduated from Stonehill, I went and did a year of volunteer service with the Lutheran Volunteer Corps in Baltimore, Maryland. And I lived on the east side of the city and had to take a bus from out there downtown to where I worked. And so I grew up in Massachusetts on the South Shore, surrounded by people who looked like me. I went to college surrounded by people who looked like me. And when I was in Baltimore, that was the first time when I was surrounded by people who did not look like me. And I remember that very first day getting on that bus to go to work. One of my housemates got on with me, and she's a black woman, and we both sat down, and I looked around me on that bus, and I was the only white person. And for me, I felt like a fish out of water. I was like, I cannot, I've never experienced something like this before. I felt like everybody was looking at me. I felt like that something wasn't quite right. And now looking back on it, it's I almost didn't feel safe. And so when I start to think about those things, why was it that just because I was surrounded by people who didn't look like me, and particularly because I was surrounded by people of color, that I didn't feel safe, even though there was nothing, absolutely nothing to actually make me feel that way. Nothing happened. Everybody was going to work. But I remember having to sit there and unpack that feeling on the bus. So months go by and everything's fine. I built really, really good community with Miss Mavis and all these people on the bus. And then things I started to become more aware of my whiteness when Freddie Gray was killed in Baltimore. I was living there that spring as well. And for those of you who don't know his story, it's horrific, as all of these stories are, of young black men who are just murdered by the police. He was standing in West Baltimore, and he saw the police coming and he was like, I don't want anything to do with them. So he just started to walk away. And they weren't coming to talk to him. They weren't coming to pick him up or anything. They were just in the neighborhood. So he walked away. And the police apparently didn't like that very much. So they chased him down. They tackled him. They shackled him, threw him in the back of a police van, and gave him what they call a rough ride. And they slam on the brakes and whip around corners really fast. And the man wasn't seatbelted into a seat, and he like flung around the back of this bus so violently that like his spine was severed, and he ended up passing away a few days later, right? So I lived in Baltimore when this whole thing went down, and all the protests that arose from it with Black Lives Matter and all the other groups in the city. And I remember like one day when the protests were like, they were coming downtown, which is where I worked. They had been happening on the west side of the city for the most part, but they came downtown where I worked, and the organization I was working for closed early that day so that people could go home. Excuse me. And I remember a colleague of mine, another white man, being like very worried that I wasn't going to get home safely. He was like, promise me that you'll call me. He walked me to my bus stop with my housemate, the African American woman that I lived with at the time. And I remember getting on the bus and like being nervous, you know. I was nervous that people were gonna look at me and think that, like, just because I was white, that I sympathized with the police, that I thought they were gonna know I had two cops in my family. I thought they were gonna know that, or think that, that I wasn't like a safe white person or a good white person, that I was one of the other ones. And again, nobody said anything to me. Nobody said anything to me, right? And so I remember getting off the bus with my housemate, and like she grabbed my hand and we were walking across the street, like just to make sure that we'd get home safe together, right? And I remember a little while later that night sitting down and watching the news with this woman, and this was the night that like the CVS on the west side of the city got lit up, and there was looting and all these different types of activities. And I remember the mayor getting on TV, and she was a black woman, Stephanie Rawlings Blake, I think was her name. I don't know if she's still the mayor. I don't think so. But she got on TV, and she used a word to describe some of the protesters that growing up I didn't know was very derogatory towards black folks, and she called them thugs. And I remember saying like, yeah, they are. I remember being like, yep, like they're acting like a bunch of thugs. What are they acting like that for? Looting and burning down the CVS and all this kind of stuff, right? I remember saying that next to my friend who was a black woman, and she just turned and looked at me and was like, what did you just say? And I was like, what? She's like, I don't think you know what that word means. Like, she assumed the best in me in that moment after I essentially just slapped her in the face. And I was like, I had to start to think about it myself, right? That I thought something like that was okay to say because a black woman said it. And because the president later said it, who was also a black man at the time. It's Barack Obama. And just to be confronted with how hurtful I was using a word like that in the skin that I'm in. So I remember apologizing to my housemate later, not really knowing how hurtful something like that was, and watching how much it hurt her to see someone who she thought she was very close with and very good friends with use something like that in such a derogatory way. So yeah, it was like in a moment like that where I was like, I'm walking around this world causing so much hurt to people that I don't even know, like in a way that I don't even know that that's what I'm doing. I didn't know how hurtful something like that was. And that just made me realize I have, as I think many people who have shared some of these videos who are in the kind of skin that I'm in, I've realized once again that I still have so much to learn. So yeah, that was, I think that's my experience of like the first time I was very aware of the color of my skin, and also how hurtful like white folks can be with something that seems so very small. And my challenge is for other folks who are taking up this challenge this week. Like, you don't have to have this like traumatic experience of somebody being really hurtful towards you for you to realize the color of your skin. I think if you're willing to take a hard enough look at yourself, some white folks in particular, but it could be anybody, I don't want to make a generalization, but you might realize if you start looking at it from the perspective of when you've caused somebody the most harm, and if you've taken a minute to reflect on how your whiteness has played into that, it might give you another lane to tell a story. So I have to think about who I'm going to tag in this to challenge, because that's the other part of this challenge is once you share your video to think of 2 people that you want to take on this challenge as well. So I got to think on that a little bit, but I'm going to share it on Facebook, and hope that we, as we continue on this journey together, can be brave, can be vulnerable, and can put ourselves out there in a way that allows people to know that, like, here we are. This is how we're showing up now, and this is why we're willing to do this, because we all need to continue to learn together. This is like undoing racism isn't gonna happen overnight, but it will happen if there are a group of people committed to it, and committed to undoing it within themselves first. So this is why we start here. Anyway, I hope everybody watching this has a good day. We're in Massachusetts, where it's cold and raining today, and if your family celebrates Thanksgiving, I know it's a tricky holiday to celebrate if we don't think of our Indigenous brothers and sisters within the continental United States, and everything that Thanksgiving implies with that. But I hope that if you are gathered with your family and your friends and those who you care deeply about, that you have like a beautiful day together to celebrate the love and the thankfulness that you have for that family and for those friends. I hope you all are well, and see you sometime soon. All right.